harm reduction? Why not say, hey, adulterer, we don't want you to get AIDS or hepatitis or STDs. We don't want any children to be birthed out of wedlock. Here's some condoms, adulterer. We want you to know that you could be safe here. It's the same thing. And yet the church is adopting it because the secular world, someone with some letters behind their name said that you're going to save lives, Pastor. You're going to save lives, and this person's going to have another day to battle and maybe one day stop doing drugs. It's brain broke.
Addiction is not a surprise to God. We've got to stop acting like it.
This is Recovery in Christ, where we equip the church and bring hope to the hurting.
Welcome back. We have another episode with Sarah Keel, Executive Director at Renew Clinic in Knoxville, Tennessee. She's not new to you. We're going to jump right in. Obviously, if you're watching this, you've probably watched the previous couple of episodes about the brain disease of addiction. And today, as I told you at the end of those episodes, we wanted to talk about harm reduction or safe places to do drugs. I don't know why I get tickled every time I bring it up, but I know why, because in my head I'm saying words that I shouldn't say, out loud in a nice conversation. But let's dive in, because this is something that I first learned about almost a decade ago in Europe when I was spending time in Europe. But I'll let you bring it in. It's starting to creep its way more and more here into the Southeast, where both Sarah and we are. We're in Middle Tennessee. She's in East Tennessee, about 2.5, 3 hours away. But it's starting to creep its way even down here and even into the church. So Sarah, tell us what it is. What is harm reduction or safe places?
Yeah, so harm reduction is definitely a broad term. So
it sounds good, right? It sounds compassionate.
Yeah. Who doesn't want to reduce harm?
Yeah.
That is just Logic 101, it's Christianity 101, but it's under the there's a few things to it. So it includes naloxone, so that's a overdose reversal drug. I think that's a good thing.
Sure.
When people are overdosing, and to save a life is a good thing. And then there are other aspects of harm reduction, like testing strips. I have different thoughts about that. Haven't fully thought it all the way through, which means that people can use a testing strip to see if there's fentanyl in their drug,
in their cocaine, or in their heroin, or in their marijuana.
Yeah. So things like that. So those would be under harm reduction, but even like passing condoms out is under this harm reduction philosophy. But there's also like things like needle exchange programs or safe injection sites, supervised injection sites. And those are the things that I initially had just a visceral response to, I guess you could say, the needle exchange in particular, and the safe using places, which a lot of more liberal cities in the United States have adopted. But I've heard that conversation being had here in Knoxville in government conversations. Even conservative government officials I've heard kind of inclining their ear to the idea. And so that's what I would say is, the harm reduction avenue is how do we reduce harm?
Yeah, and I'll add a caveat to that, because I still think it is a part of the harm reduction today, but definitely was a part of the main conversation. I was in Brussels, Belgium, sent with my church, and I was really teaching and doing some things about addiction, and just having a conversation with the well-meaning believer of that church in Brussels, Belgium, Christian church in Brussels, Belgium. And I'll never forget it. We're sitting there at a cafe with these amazing buildings that America does not have, hundreds of year-old buildings. I've never been to Europe. It was beautiful. And then, as I was beginning to have this conversation, drinking my coffee, this was brought up as a solution to a problem, and I thought I was on like a practical joke show. I was like, "Is this like what?" And it was the main crescendo of that was disease, AIDS, hepatitis, things like that. And harm reduction of, if we have clean needles and a needle exchange, and we can give these drug addicts clean needles, it will reduce the harm of these diseases. And I just thought I was being pranked. I thought this was a joke, and I thought, and still do in many ways, about some of these things, that's brain broke. It is under the guise of compassion, and yet it's they're being serious. That this is really a model to, and I guess and I don't think you said it, maybe you did, but I guess the mindset is, and as we get into this from their side of view, is let's keep them alive until they decide that they don't want to do drugs anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like hyper enablement to me.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes me go back to too, like whenever we're counseling family members of addicted loved ones, I mean, one of the number one things that people do to as far as like enabling is like giving them money, not letting them like feel the consequence of their behavior and their actions, and how that is contributing to their addiction and not helpful. And so I kind of apply that to this situation as well. I agree that it's enabling. I agree that it sends a message to the community and to people who are using. I do not find it loving. I do not find it compassionate. That's also going back to the conversation that human beings are created in the image of God, which means that there's inherent dignity and value and great purpose for their life. And assisting them to condescend themselves down to using drugs safely, I do not find compassionate or loving.
Yeah.
So that's just an initial thought. But yeah, you're right, Adam. I mean, a lot of the conversations, it comes from this idea that until they're ready to change, they can use drugs safely and not die. And again, at a quick glance, okay, tell me more, you know. But it still doesn't pass the smell test, because what produces change? What kind of moves people into this place of wanting to change? It's desperation, it's urgency, it's consequences. And if we're removing those things, does it really encourage change, or does it, I would say it doesn't encourage change. You know, it actually discourages change. And so I just don't think it really passes the smell test there. And also people will throw up studies. I had a friend that I just recently talked to, and she is a believer, and she works in the secular industry, and she agrees that this is a good thing. But some of the studies that were sent to me, basically what the studies that encourage these safe places to use, their evidence is because it reduces HIV, Hep C, and people seek treatment, according to them. There's a lot of unanswered questions as far as how do you know they're seeking treatment? Like, did they just check yes on a box whenever you handed them a needle?
Yeah. Are they required to check yes on a box to get the needle?
So there's that question, but there's also the question of how does it affect the community? How does it affect how many people in the community are actually using? Suicide rates, motor vehicle accidents, crime rates. A lot of those things are not addressed in these studies. And I think that's those are things that have to be spoken to.
Yeah.
You know, I was just thinking about the prodigal son in Luke 15, where it talks about, and he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. And what's the next line?
Came to us.
But when he came to himself.
Yep.
There's a correlation between that this whole concept seems to violate.
Yeah, well, I found a study actually in 2022 that syringe exchange programs, they decreased HIV rates by 18.2%, but the study also said that could just be an overall decrease of HIV infections nationwide because it's such a treatable disease, so is Hep C, but that there was an increased opioid-related mortality rate in the cities that had the syringe exchange programs by 2 to 3%, an increased mortality rate. And so it has a quote, right? I quoted it, wrote it down on this paper. It said, "It is possible that even if SCPs, which is a syringe exchange program, reduce bloodborne illness, they will be ineffective at curbing drug use." No. And so I just find that, you know, we're trying to deal with a bloodborne illness disease, which is really not as high risk as it used to be in the past. They're highly treatable diseases on the back of this very high risk behavior of inserting a needle into your arm and putting heroin into your. I mean, the risk outweigh what they're trying to prevent.
Yeah.
And so, but the argument in this study that it is likely not good for the community at large is that it promotes continued or increased drug use by providing supplies for the drug use, which means they have more money to purchase drugs. And it also provides a safe place to interact with other users, increasing networking opportunities, expanding access to new potential partners. And communities that build these SEPs may attract nearby drug users and or signal that they also support more police leniency for drug abuse and drug crimes. And so it really sends a message to the community as a whole. But I've heard a lot of Christians who support like syringe exchange programs and safe injection sites where, well, this is an opportunity for us to meet people where they're at and to interact with people who, you know, we wouldn't normally get to interact with. And I think to myself, I mean, are there not other creative ways to go out there and minister to people other than handing them a needle? I mean, I don't think it's a very solid argument because there are so many creative ways that the Lord can provide for us.
That's right.
And it doesn't align biblically. I'll get into that as well.
Yeah. So I had just learned that this is something that the church is starting to adopt. And this is where I want to discuss. Because if you're watching, church pastor, church staff, church believer, faith believer, you need to really go back and watch our previous episode because it really boils down, when we're talking about logic and you want to boil it down to the finest point, it really boils down to the secular modality of this is not anything to do with morals or spiritual. This is all disease and victimhood, and the way you approach a problem, the solution to a problem is really based on how you view the problem. And so when I'm hearing that the church is starting to do this, and again, we're not going to say names or anything like that, and I want to lovingly do this. That's why I've stopped myself from saying multiple things multiple times. You got to view it at its base root. And go back and watch that episode. I don't want to discuss those things, but I believe that the Lord has called Sarah and I to very similar things, but hers is a little different. She not different, but we're approaching it different. Her calling is more to be in the public square, discussing biblical worldviews and logic and truth to the secular world. And I believe at S2L, we have the calling to do the same thing, but do it to the church.
Yeah.
And I think that they're the same thing because once the church is emboldened, has the truth, Sarah's cause, our cause to the secular world will be radically more effective because the church will be behind the message. And right now we're seeing the church is confused and adopting the secular message, and that's a problem. And so if this is, as we discussed, go watch that episode, press pause, go watch it, both episodes, come back. If there is if you remove the sin issue, if you remove the need for the gospel, then we're talking about something radically different. But if that's still there in a biblical worldview, and you have a pastor of a church or a church group or a ministry engaging in this on church property, you're now enabling not only the addiction, but you're saying that this sin is okay. Come here, we want to do this, and you're not addressing it. So why not hand out the condoms in the parking lot, as she said, is also a part of harm reduction? Why not say, hey, adulterer, we don't want you to get AIDS or hepatitis or STDs. We don't want any children to be birthed out of wedlock. Here's some condoms, adulterer. We want you to know that you could be safe here. It's the same thing. And yet the church is adopting it because the secular world, someone with some letters behind their name said that you're going to save lives, pastor. You're going to save lives, and this person's going to have another day to battle and maybe one day stop doing drugs. It's brain broke. I understand. No one wants, Sarah and myself, we don't want people to die. That's right. We want people to live a life of abundance and know Jesus and have an eternal security. But we can't sacrifice telling the truth, and that's what's happening in my opinion. And when I hear that the church is doing it, man, it just drives me it almost, when I heard that, and this was recently, it was like a punch to the soul. I was like, there's no way. Because when I heard that 10 years ago, I laughed. And I was like, this is a joke. I'm being recorded, and I don't understand. And I want you to talk. I know you have a point, and so go ahead with your point. But Sarah, here in a minute, I want you to talk about that Trojan horse that you and I have discussed previously. But what are we?
Well, I was just thinking about Jesus, like how he handled these things, right? If we're talking about the church, I mean, he's our model. Look at how he handled the woman in adultery, right? He treated her with compassion,
Yes.
right? He treated her with mercy. He treated her with grace.
Yes.
But he addressed sin as sin.
Go and sin no more.
Yes. And you know what? He did the same thing with the Samaritan woman at the well.
That's right.
He met her where she was at, right? Talk about meeting, but not condoning what is sinful.
Right.
That's the difference. And honestly, it just shocks me to think that this is entering the church.
Right.
It is.
And here's what that would look like today. If what the church is doing. Jesus with the woman caught in adultery. Instead of rebuking the hypocrites and then, which was fine and righteous, and then saying go and sin no more. Here's what that would look like with this brain broke mentality. Hey guys, you're saying that she has natural sexual urges, and these men obviously do too. This was something that she's doing. Why are we condemning her? This is natural. God gave her sexual urges. There's nothing wrong with that. What are we doing? Let's celebrate her. It's brain broke.
Yeah.
That's not what Jesus did. He rebuked the hypocrites because he saw their wicked hearts as well. But he told her to go and sin no more. But she's forgiven, not encouraged her to live in the life that she was living safely with the hopes of one day her not doing it anymore.
Yeah, and Paul did the same thing in Athens, didn't he? Right? He goes, I see you, you have this God, this God, this God, this God. Let me tell you about another. So he met them where they were at, but no way did he encourage what they were doing.
So yeah, I want to speak to that. I actually found a study where it assessed how faith leaders, and it was predominantly the Christian church. I think it included Protestantism and the Catholic Church. Various denominations did not specify what denominations they spoke with, but it was basically a survey on how the faith community felt about having syringe exchange programs, either in their churches or in the community. And it said, the conclusion was that 56% of these leaders and congregants agreed to having syringe exchange programs. Only 7% strongly disagreed. Only 7%. This is the problem that we're talking about. But it made me think, though, of the Barna study that recently came out that only 3 to 5% of professed evangelicals have a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in alignment.
That's a great point. I think there's also a point of, if the data is true, and maybe is not discussed in the church, about 1 in 5 families, their family members died of a drug overdose, or a very close friend died of a drug overdose. So it is a hot topic right now for us. And the ones speaking the loudest are these ones that say that a needle exchange is a solution. So I think that makes total sense that 53% of the church would be in agreement to this, because who's speaking into this? How was this presented on the survey, right? And so
Right.
I think that's not surprising to me, unfortunately.
It's not surprising to me at all.
I think of that stat that talks about only 10% actually seek treatment as well. And how is doing this going to help them seek treatment?
Yeah, well, it makes me go back to, I think earlier, I cannot find where my notes are, but earlier we had talked about, some of these studies, they only speak to just very few things, like, hey, people are willing to get into treatment and it reduces the transmission of bloodborne pathogens. Okay, well, let's look at what happened in Colorado when they legalized marijuana. And I know it's different, but you could make the argument that, that there was a decrease in incarceration rates due to drug-related offenses. Wow. You could make a study and say that and be like, oh, it's a good idea to legalize marijuana.
Good point.
But you're not talking about how accident-related deaths where people tested positive for marijuana increased by 138%.
Car accidents?
Car accidents after this was legalized. They're not talking about how, and there was actually a comprehensive study done on this after all of the initial responses, that suicide rates in people increased almost like 27% that tested positive for marijuana. Like after they did the toxology report, they had tested positive for marijuana. Suicide increased 27%. The overall usage in youth and adults increased exponentially. I mean, all these things increased. And that's not the part that people are speaking to. Like, yeah, there might be some initial benefits where you're not going to get HIV, or you have a safe using place where you're not going to die. But is that really the goal? And what message does it send? Again, when a society is not obeying God and does not believe in objective morality, or has reduced human beings down to that of an ape or a brain, this is what you get. This is the secularization of a community, and it's condescending to humans.
Yeah.
To say, this is the best you're going to get because you have a disease, and we're just going to help you not die until you're ready to change, which we talked about before. It likely discourages change. But a lot of these studies, and not all of them agree, but the studies that are propped up and spoken about are actually not that comprehensive. There's a lot of missing variables, and it's really not good evidence.
And they're spoken of as the gospel. And
Yeah.
the other side of the table is never mentioned, and if mentioned, it would be it would just be trashed on. It would be, oh, they were this or that or this or that. Oh, none of the scientists of today agree with that study. That person, da da da. It's comical. It's comical, and I think even using language that is, I hate using the word trigger, but like keywords like harm, right? You hear the oath of a doctor, and it talks about harm. Well, this is harm reduction, and if I'm not mistaken, the oath of a doctor is cause no harm, like cause no harm to your patient, and this is harm reduction. But it's actually, we would argue that, as she's saying, there is data and stuff that it's saying that it's doing this and it's saving lives, but we would argue the contrary, that it is causing harm.
That's right.
Yes.
Major harm. Hey guys, we're coming to the end of part A. As you could tell, this is a really good episode. You don't want to miss part B, but we hope that you subscribe to this channel, because part B is coming out in just a couple weeks. And if you haven't, go back and watch the 2 episodes that we did on the disease model of brain disease addiction model. Really good stuff, really good content. I want to thank Sarah. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and tune in for part B.